Thanks for having me along, and thanks to the Yarra Ranges Landcare Network and also the Yarra Ranges Council for hosting myself and Agribusiness Yarra Valley. We feel that this is a really important topic for not just fruit growers, but for everyone growing fruit and also for protecting the diversity of insects in our region. So I'm going to talk to everyone tonight about using an integrated pest management approach for the management of fruit fly. I'm funded by Agriculture Victoria, and I'm hoping that with this recording, that means the information about Queensland Fruit Fly and some really strategic, careful management solutions are left in the Yarra Valley when we are no longer funded. So thank you so much for having me. So as I explained, we're going to be using an integrated pest management approach. Now I'm going to use the term IPM because it's so much easier to say. So where we start first is identifying our target pest, and in this case it's Queensland fruit fly. When we're looking for an IPM plan, we come up with answers about the consequence of the damage that this pest can do. We often look at the pest life cycle so that we understand where those weaknesses and strengths are. We look at how that pest interacts with other insects in our production system. And a production system can be some tomatoes in your veggie garden. They could be your whole entire backyard, or it might be a community garden, or it might be a whole paddock of strawberries or an orchard. So a production system is anything that you want it to be. It's the area that we're going to focus on. Something that is really crucial for discussion tonight is the consequences of control. We have not had to control Queensland fruit fly in the Yarra Valley before, so we're not very aware of all the damages that it can do. I've travelled to the north of Victoria, I've travelled in New South Wales and Queensland, and I can see the damage that the control of Queensland fruit fly does. And it's really harmful to all our beneficial insects that we have in our production systems. Most importantly, we need to look at what our crop needs, and we also need to look at where our intended market is or use. So if you don't want to have chemicals in the fruit that you're about to eat, this IPM strategy for Queensland fruit fly is really the only way forward when Queensland fruit fly establishes in the Yarra Valley. So when we talk about IPM, I want you to just focus on the cultural methods at the bottom. So we're looking at cultural methods like removing a plant or things that we actually have to get in there and change the whole system. We concentrate on physical and mechanical methods. So this could be picking the fruit off of the tree. We look at biological methods. So this is often using another animal or insect to help control the pest. And the very tip of this control is chemical. So chemicals still play a part in IPM. And this is why we need to consider how we're going to use all of these tools. We want to try and use the chemicals for the least amount. So let's start doing an IPM strategy for Queensland fruit fly. This is our target pest. Queensland fruit fly is native to Australia. It's native to the east coast of Queensland. It's 7 to 8 mil long. It has a brown-red body. It has distinct yellow markings, and they are the shoulder pads and the stripes on the back and the triangle on the back. It has a relatively clear wing pattern, and it is one of Australia's two most damaging economic insects. So this is a concern for biosecurity, trade, productivity. The other one's Mediterranean fruit fly, and we'll touch on that later. So what are the consequences? Queensland fruit fly can impact all the fruit we grow, whether that's commercial or whether that's in our backyards. It has implications on biosecurity and trade, and it also has an implication on how we manage our use of insecticides. And therefore, we need to come up with this integrated pest management strategy. It is really important to note, however, that it's very hard to control Queensland fruit fly using integrated pest management on your own. It really is essential that we have everyone in the whole region working towards that same common goal, and that's the prevention and management of Queensland fruit fly. So we have Queensland fruit fly in the east of Australia, in that yellow zone. It's actually spread a little bit further than that lately. And in Western Australia, there's a really nasty fly that gets into fruit quite similar to Queensland fruit fly called the Mediterranean fruit fly. But we don't have that over here in the east. So there's a lot of fruit trade restrictions between the east and the west. And there's also pest-free zones. For example, South Australia and Tasmania don't have either pest. So that's why it's so important that we protect these growing regions because they don't yet have it. So in Melbourne, we expect Queensland fruit fly to be able to live for 3 to 6 generations. And this is very dependent on temperature and humidity. So those warm La Nina weather days and those patterns, that's essentially encouraging and allowing the Queensland fruit fly to live more easily, and therefore they can have more generations of fruit fly and they become more damaging. This little picture down in the corner here is simply the states in pink that have Queensland fruit fly. So no fruit can be taken out of these states without strict controls and treatments. So another part of IPM is knowing our pest and getting the identification correct. And that's not just identifying the actual adult pest, it's also trying to correctly identify those larvae. Now, if you've ever seen maggots or larvae in rotting fruit or rotting organic matter, or even animals that are subject to being fly blown, all of these larvae look quite similar unless you can get in there and identify them really closely. So we use clues from our environment, we use information from what practices have been happening in that particular environment, and we look at hosts. And this way we can deduct the answer down to what it could be, and then we actually might need to send larvae off for laboratory testing. You can go to any of these websites and look for really good guides on how to identify Queensland fruit fly, and I recommend that you chase them up in your own time. And now for the life cycle. So I'm going to start at the pupa stage, and the pupa stage is often underground or buried in a crevice in a tree, somewhere where its temperature is stable and no predators are going to get this pupae. Inside this pupa is the adult fly developing, and when the fly is ready, it can emerge out of that pupa case and tunnel through the ground. And when it's ready, it will emerge from underground to the top of the surface of the soil, and it will dry itself out and start looking for food. The flies mature when they eat the proteins. And when I mean mature, I mean they are sexually mature and they are ready to breed. And so they can reach mating stage, and that's when the males and the females look out for each other, and they go through a mating process. The female fruit fly lays eggs in the ripening fruit. Those eggs turn into larvae, and in this whole process, it accelerates the degradation of the fruit, so it turns into a jelly-like rot, and that's what the larvae live off while they're inside the fruit. All of this promotes the fruit to become riper quicker. It falls to the ground, and this helps those larvae get to the ground. And once they crawl into the ground, they can develop that pupa case around them, and all of this turns into the life cycle and can be completed in as little as 28 to 32 days. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at all the different stages of this life cycle. We're going to look for its strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to come up with an IPM strategy for controlling Queensland fruit fly. So here's some pretty gory pictures of how the fruit fly can inject her eggs just under the skin of the fruit and how they sit just nicely in the cavity there. There's plenty of room for the larvae to hatch out and start munching away on that fruit. And this is what we don't want to see in our fruit in the Yarra Valley. So we have apricots, tomatoes, cherries, and peaches in this picture here. And this is a sight that, unfortunately, more Yarra Valleans are starting to see. It is right throughout Melbourne. It has come further down from the border between New South Wales and Victoria into Shepparton and even Seymour. So it is in surrounding regions around us. And this is the outside damage. You can see tiny little dots here, and that's where the fruit fly has stung and laid her eggs into that fruit. And inside you can see the severity of that rot, and it happens so very quickly. Another thing to point out with this photo is that glassy jelly-like brown rot inside the apple. It's very different to a codling moth damage, which is drier and almost like sawdust. These are some plums that we found in the Yarra Valley in 2018. These were actually found on a farm, and the department helped us identify that. And you can see on that speckled red side of the plum that it's a little bit flat. You can see a little prick mark where the fruit fly has laid her eggs, but you can also see a black round hole, and that's where the larvae have actually chewed their way out of the fruit. So these guys have been done and dusted, laid their eggs, grown their larvae, and matured all before the plum is actually ripe. So it is really important to understand that Queensland fruit fly often sting ripening fruit, and they're often done and dusted before that fruit's ripe that we want to eat it and go and find it. And just to the left of the screen there is an apple, and it just shows you how different that fruit fly damage inside can look, because this is not as glassy as the last picture, but it's definitely indicating tunneling. So for you, I have the ability to show you a Queensland fruit fly larvae jumping. So watch the larvae on the fingertip. It was able to put its head to its tail and jump, and we'll watch it do one more. And so that's how the larvae move and propel themselves out of the fruit onto the ground. We've also found some Queensland fruit fly larvae in lemons, and this was actually in East Warburton. You can see an ovipositor hole here on the lemon. You can see where that rot has accelerated, and this is just a white mold which is growing on the skin of the lemon. But inside you can actually see more than Queensland fruit fly larvae. So we've actually found island fly larvae in this lemon as well. And in lemon, the Queensland fruit fly larvae will sit just on the edge of that white section, and they will be looking at trying to not get eaten by other animals, and they'll be looking at trying to not get too hot on any one side of the fruit. So they'll be trying to find that perfect environment for them to progress from small larvae to large larvae. And this is what they do when they hit the ground. They will bury themselves into a safe and secure location. So you can see how quickly this is happening. This is real time. Once they've escaped the danger, they'll try and put a hard case around themselves, which is that pupa case. And that will allow them to morph into that adult insect within about 7 to 10 days. So let's look at the strengths and weaknesses. The Queensland fruit fly population is very adaptable to a wide host range. There's over 100 fruits that it can infest. The population is very adaptable to some new environmental conditions, so we know that it's more tolerable of cold weather and frosty weather nowadays. We're also observing that the fruit fly is likely to be able to tolerate some insecticides. So as a population, not 100% of the population can be knocked out with one insecticide. We know that Queensland fruit fly can survive well in backyards in city and peri-urban areas, particularly where they're not maintained or not controlled. And we also know that they like being in the blackberries, so those weeded areas along waterways and roads that don't get maintained. We know, evidence suggests, that fruit fly is very good at getting through wire fences and state borders. It happens. We need to be able to deal with this. It's really good at hitchhiking. Most fruit fly is transported around the country inside of fruit as larvae. It's very good at camouflage. The pest can actually be in a tree and someone would not actually notice it was there. They're really good at having multiple partners, which means that their eggs inside of the female can have to have up to potentially 4 or 5 different fathers in any one clutch of eggs. This means her genetic diversity is massive, and if they were to all be in one fruit, that means that they're very likely to be able to breed with themselves in that new environment without having any genetic concerns. They're actually very good at overwintering as well, which means that they can survive some of the colder, harsher temperatures that would normally knock them. A weakness is also overwintering. It means we can use this cold period to show freedom from fruit fly or eliminate fruit fly from an area. If that successful cold period is long enough, we know that that still has some impact on them. And that's why we think we're doing so well in the Yarra Valley. We do still have some of these extended cold nights, extended cold seasons, and some frosts. It's just unfortunately not right across the Yarra Valley. We know that the Queensland fruit fly individuals can be prone to some weather and climate situations. When there is a dry heat associated with that strong wind, we know that that can knock some fruit fly out of the population as well. So we haven't had those dry, hot, northerly 45 degrees days for quite a few years. So at the moment, those last few years, the conditions for fruit fly with La Nina have been extremely favourable for fruit fly. We also know that Queensland fruit fly doesn't fly far. It would actually prefer just to go from tree to tree, and it would prefer to go back to the same host fruit that it came out of. So I know that they do go to different fruits, but only because they have to. Obviously, insecticides are something we can use to control Queensland fruit fly because they are susceptible and I will be knocked out by some insecticides. And we know that they take different time in different life stages dependent on temperature. So we need to be able to observe that and how we're going to then apply our control so that it works best at the right time. They obviously can't get through hard barriers. So by this, I mean a glass container, if you've got them and sealed away. For example, you might be taking them to get identified, but netting is also a hard barrier that they can't get through. They obviously don't like freezing or boiling, so those temperature extremes are what we use for controlling the infested fruit with the larvae in it, or the eggs. And they also don't like a low oxygen or a drowning situation. So we will touch on the technique of fermentation, which is quite a good way of being able to deal with larger volumes of fruit waste that could be infested with Queensland fruit fly. There are some predators around, so ants love to eat the larvae in the pupa case. Birds and animals are able to eat the fly or the larvae in the fruit. There's some fungi, which is exciting news, that actually can live in the soil and really damage the Queensland fruit fly larvae and the fly as it's emerging from its pupa case. And there's some investigations into nematodes and bacteria. The number one weakness of Queensland fruit fly, though, is when we humans get together and get organised and engage warfare on this Queensland fruit fly by using all of this in an area-wide management program. So these are all the host fruits. You can see here that there are tomatoes and capsicums and things like cashews, all of the things that we typically don't call fruit. But the big ones are stone fruits, pome fruits, and then you can start looking at berries, and then we move into those typical vegetable gardens, chilies, capsicums, and things like that. Really important to note that lily pillies on the lily pilly trees, so those little fruits that some people put into jams, they're also a fruit fly host. So what are the implications of the pest and what are the implications of the fruit fly management? So we have increased costs, and that means that we've got to put fruit fly traps out, we've got to put bait out, and we've got to spend a lot of time looking for Queensland fruit fly. There's the cost of the damaged fruit if it does get out of hand, and the extra care and potentially extra costs of disposal of that fruit in a safe environment, for example, being eaten by livestock. there's integrated pest management complications. That means that the chemicals that can be used to control Queensland fruit fly, if they're sprayed in a broad spectrum manner, they can actually hurt or harm or kill some of the good bugs that we're using that are already in place to keep some of our bad bugs in bay. And of course, the cost of not being able to trade or swap or give each other fruit. So you can't have any Queensland fruit fly in your fruit to be able to trade, and it is illegal to actually trade fruit fly infested fruit. So we're going to touch on that IPM because that's so important. An IPM strategy for two-spotted mite is actually the importation and help from predators. So Persimolis and Californicus are two insects that we can either bring in or promote in a production system, and they naturally help get rid of that two-spotted mite population. If a Queensland fruit fly control is brought in and applied in a broad spectrum manner, this can kill off the Persimolis and Californicus, and we can end up with what we term a mite flare. So that's hundreds and thousands of mite all over the leaf. And the result from that is the use of miticides, or the plant actually doesn't do very well at all. So by controlling one problem, we actually cause another problem, and that's not a pathway that we need to go down. In the Yarra Valley, Western flower thrip is actually a really important pest to manage because it can get into the flowers and damage the fruit. And that fruit is unsaleable. And interestingly, Western flower thrip is resistant to the known chemical controls. So many strawberry growers in the Yarra Valley and many other fruit growers in the Yarra Valley actually use good bugs to come in and help control the Western flower thrip. And this is quite a common practice, and it's also practiced to be able to reduce the number of sprays that go onto the fruit. So if Queensland fruit fly was to come in, once again, like that two-spotted mite situation, if a chemical was used in a broad spectrum way to try and kill Queensland fruit fly in and around a fruit crop, quite likely the bugs that we use to control the Western flower thrip pest would die off. And this means that there would be crop losses from the Western flower thrip damage, particularly in strawberries. So we don't, again, want to come in and try and control one problem and cause another problem with pest management. We need a smarter strategy. So we need to understand a little bit about the timing of Queensland fruit fly when it is a risk. Well, it is a risk now. It's been a risk for the last couple of years, and it's likely to be a risk in future fruit seasons. We have to acknowledge that it is a fairly new pest to the Yarra Valley, and not many people are actually aware of how to manage the pest or even what it looks like. So we need to increase everyone's awareness of what it is and how dangerous it is. It's going to be a problem in future fruit seasons because all of the people living around us are having to deal with it, or more to the point, some people are not dealing with it. So it's always going to be a risk to people growing fruit in the Yarra Valley. And some of those things that we have to remember: warm, humid weather, ideal for fruit fly. We know that the fruit fly will overwinter as an adult fly. And we need to consider that in the Yarra Valley, we have 10, even 11, I'm pretty sure rainers would like to say 12 months of the year that they have ripening fruit. So fruit fly will go from apples into citrus, and that citrus can go into cherries or plums or stone fruit in the following year. And tomatoes and capsicums are in there, as well as apples and pears, and the cycle just keeps going around and around and around. We have to be able to break that yearly cycle to successfully manage fruit fly. So where are the risks? Quite often the risks can be on public land, for example, along the sides of the road or creek. And this is blackberries, cherry plums, and even prickly pear. Anywhere where there's large areas of fruit, the volume of fruit actually increases the risk. So commercial producers are potentially a source of Queensland fruit fly if they're not managed. And this includes abandoned orchards or abandoned production areas where there's no maintenance or no management. Anywhere where there's the trade and transport of fruit is a high risk practice for managing Queensland fruit fly. So it could be a picnic basket with an infested apple. It could be at a local market, retail market, or it could be at the wholesale markets. All of these locations, environments, and practices are a risk for Queensland fruit fly. However, the number one problem area for Queensland fruit fly is often a backyard or a home garden where the home gardeners are unaware and uneducated and unmotivated to do anything about Queensland fruit fly. So everyone has a responsibility here, and I'm here to help people in all of these different situations be able to do their bit. We do need to touch on biosecurity just for a second here, because in those states that I mentioned that don't have Queensland fruit fly, if Queensland fruit fly is found, their government is ready to employ their Department of Agriculture to respond to this emergency situation. So in Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia, those governments and their respective agricultural departments will come in and they have the right to come onto your property, strip the fruit, treat the ground, treat the tree, and do continual treatments until the fruit fly problem is declared solved or finished, eradicated. There's even kids that can't take their school lunch boxes with fruit in them to school because they want to restrict the movement of any fruit in order to be able to control Queensland fruit fly. So if you do see a biosecurity sign up, or you'd see a dump point for dumping your fruit, or you're travelling interstate, please be mindful that different organisations, different states have different concerns about Queensland fruit fly, and as long as you're not taking it, you'll be right. So some examples of what other areas are doing with Queensland fruit fly and what trying to do fruit production with Queensland fruit fly looks like. You can see there's damaged fruit. There's a huge effort to clean up the fruit and bag it and try and dispose of it in a practical way. Other areas like Shepparton and Mildura are doing tree removal programs. So there is a lot of fruit production and a lot of home gardens that are actually sacrificing the volume that they grow, or they're using it as a cleanup and an opportunity to redo their backyard. But at the end of the day, it's quite a drastic approach to actually offer to take someone's trees down. It's not a strategy that the Yarra Valley has looked at and considered for home gardeners yet. We have been working with orchardists to remove unmanaged trees, for example, in an unmaintained or an abandoned orchard. And we also have been working with the roadside crew to try and get rid of some of those fruiting weed trees. And here's some more typical damage of Queensland fruit fly. You can see rotting peaches, rotting lemons. And the really interesting one on this page is actually, this is a nectarine. It's in Mildura and it's been stung repeatedly by Queensland fruit fly, and it's released its own gum to try and heal those wounds. So if you see an unripe peach or a ripening peach or nectarine, and you see this gum oozing out, almost like toffee, please go and investigate and see what you can see inside, because it is obviously suffering from some kind of insect damage, and if it's Queensland fruit fly damage, we should be acting straight away. So you guys are here learning about Queensland fruit fly. We're all going to go out now and look at our fruit and look at our garden setup, and I'm hoping that we can encourage you to do some fruit fly monitoring if you're not doing already. My phone number's on the screen if you would like to have help with any of your observations or monitoring. There's also information at the local council level. You can also ask your agronomy consultant if you have access to one, other gardeners, community groups, and I've been working a lot with nurseries too, so they should have staff that can help you know what to look for and know how to find it. So, this fruit fly around, what are we going to do about it? prevention is the best strategy so that we don't have to use chemicals. You can use netting and good biosecurity practices to reduce the risk coming to your property. And that's the number one strategy, is being able to just reduce the chance of infestation at all. To remove the risk, you may need to remove trees. You certainly need to pick up any fallen fruit or prevent it from falling in the first place, or just general mulching and trying to keep a tidy yard so that access is free and easy for you to move through your backyard. We're going to use a physical and mechanical component here of actually boiling or freezing or solarizing any fruit that you are suspicious that could have Queensland fruit fly in it. There's no chemicals involved in that boiling or freezing. There's no chemicals involved in that solarize either. They are all physical things that we can do. Yes, they require a little bit of elbow grease or some lifting or some time that you wouldn't ordinarily have had to spend on cleaning up your yard, but it's well worth it to be able to prevent the spread of Queensland fruit fly. Now, by boiling, I mean bringing to the boil. So not just pouring boiling water over the fruit in a bucket. It does need to be brought to the boil so that 100% of that fruit is cooked. It can also be put in the microwave or burned. If you put the fruit in the freezer, it has to be in there long enough that it's frozen solid. So not just 10 minutes, that probably won't freeze an apple, probably overnight for an apple or a few apples, but it may even take longer than that if you're trying to dispose of bags and bags of them. So double check when you've done the boiling or the freezing method that there is definitely dead larvae there. Solarizing is quite efficient, but in the Yarra Valley, I'm not quite sure we get hot enough. So in Mildura, it's a very effective method. It just means putting the fruit inside a bag, probably a black plastic bag, and some people even double bag it, and leaving this out in the sun for a period of time in order to essentially cook and suffocate those larvae inside. We need to be careful that foxes and rats and birds don't get in and break the bag before the process is complete though. If fruit fly does arrive, we do want you to report to myself while I'm engaged, an agronomist, a nursery, a community group, neighbours, someone at the local council, or a place of purchase if you've accidentally had some fruit that's infested that you've ended up buying. So this is sort of that cultural practice that we're changing as well. It's telling everyone that we have a problem. Most people will probably just want to keep it to themselves and move on, but it is really good if you can tell someone that you've got fruit fly so the word can get out and it does kick people into action and we can prevent the spread this way. So you've got fruit fly. Most people, when I speak to them, they just want to know what spray. It's not really the ideal solution because we've discussed the risk of that to those biological predators that are in our gardens doing fantastic jobs. And if you've got flowers at the time of spraying, you can also damage your pollinator insects. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the damages of cover sprays, and we're going to look at how they can be used safely if need be, but more to the point, how we can manage fruit fly in an integrated way and not resort to this method. So cover sprays are a chemical solution. We have to be very careful with safety. Now we also have to consider maximum residue limits. That's that MRL abbreviation there. And withholding periods, that's WHP. So you can't use a chemical that's going to exceed the residue limits that's safe for consumption or your end use. And withholding periods means that you can't apply a chemical within a certain amount of time of you going into that crop or harvesting that fruit. So chemicals can be used safely if they respect the residue limits and the withholding periods. But ideally, if we don't have to go there, we won't. It's also really important to manage the type of chemical that are used for Queensland fruit fly. There's actually not that many registered chemicals anymore. A lot of them have been made obsolete. And when I say registered chemicals, I mean ones that the Australian, the APVMA, so the Pet and Veterinary Medicines organisation in Australia that governs the use of chemicals. There's actually a lot of Queensland fruit fly specific chemicals that have been taken off the market because they're so harsh. So when we get down into those what we call softer chemicals, they're actually not as effective on 100% of the Queensland fruit fly population. And that means that we can risk building an insect resistance up in that population. That's where the rotation of toxicants in a chemical program is useful. Even if we do go out and spray an entire crop with a chemical and in this broad spectrum way, that's going to be a time frame when there's that chemical is actually less effective or not active anymore. And the fruit fly can actually come in from the neighbouring property or properties a few properties up and still come in and cause an infestation in peaches. So I liken putting a cover spray out on fruit trees for fruit fly, a bit like trying to kill mozzies in your kitchen with a can of spray while the front door is open. It's just not an effective use of a very strategic tool. Obviously, we need to look at market or the market where the fruit is going to or any end use requirements. So if you're going to eat them and you don't want chemicals in your fruit, don't put them on there. The use of chemicals can cause pest flares, and as we've discussed in detail tonight, the interruption of any IPM programs. So let's stay away from them if we can. If you do end up with Queensland fruit fly, we need to heavily rely on trapping the insects and inspecting the fruit so we know what to do. We know about alerting others so that they can also take action. And then you can start investigating where the source of the spread might be. In northern Victoria, the town kept getting fruit fly every year and they kept wondering what's going on, where's it coming from? It was actually starting in town every year in a locust tree. No one was eating the locusts and it was infesting the whole town. Once they actually got rid of the locust tree and they had to cull that risk because it was the drastic option, there was much more success in managing fruit fly. If we keep getting fruit fly in the Yarra Valley, we are going to have to increase our monitoring intensity. That means more traps in a small area, and we're going to have to continue this for a longer period of time. So it might be the whole summer, or we might need to start earlier, or we're probably going to have to trap every year from now on in because fruit fly is going to continue to be a risk. We can use fruit fly bait. That's the bottom left picture there, where you have a toxicant in a targeted food that only the Queensland fruit fly like. It is chemical use, but it is targeted and it doesn't damage our good bugs. Netting can be used, and of course, culling those risks and improving the hygiene and sanitation around the production area, which means getting rid of that fruit or not letting it drop. So we can look at fruit fly traps. There's many of them on the market, and I would encourage everyone to go and have a look at what is at their local nursery or what's available online or what your friends might be using, because we need at least one fruit fly trap that it can attract male Queensland fruit flies, and I would recommend at least one fruit fly trap that's either fruit scented or has protein in it to attract female flies so that we can get a good picture of what's going on. In each of the traps, they have a kill method. Some of them can be a chemical kill. Some of them involve a sticky card, which is no chemicals, and others can drown in a liquid, and often there's no chemicals in that too. So we're going to look at this fruit fly life cycle. We're going to look for weaknesses, and the weakness is that the male is very easily attracted to a lure, and he thinks that if he's going to go and get some more of this scent, that he will be more attractive to the ladies. So often you'll see a monitoring trap with a male fruit fly lure in it. When this male fruit fly lure is used in a huge outlay across a wide area, it's called mating disruption. We can actually remove a vast percentage of the male fruit flies out of a fruit fly population, but it is more typically used in large areas of production, not necessarily home gardens. Now, a fruit fly trap with a male lure can attract fruit flies in from about 200 meters away, which is significantly more than any of the female fruit fly traps or the female biased fruit fly traps can. They only work for about 20 meters because the scent of the fruit or the scent of the protein just doesn't travel further than that. There's some great recipes on our website to be able to make your own fruit-scented or protein-based trap, so it can be done at home. Now, it's really important to know that Queensland fruit fly, males and females, they all need protein to be able to sexually mature and grow and live. But the most significant time that they're attracted to this protein is between when they are growing into young teenage flies. I've got teenage boys and they're always after proteins, they're always hungry. And the other time that anyone in the Queensland fruit fly population really demands protein is females that are ready to lay eggs or becoming ready to lay eggs, because those eggs consume a lot of protein from her, so she needs to be able to replenish that protein. So in the whole life cycle, there's actually only about a 10-day window when the fruit flies are attracted to the protein and fruit traps. We really need to consider other strategies around this life cycle as well. So we've got some DIY traps here. The DIY protein one, the protein is actually the Vegemite or the yeast extract. And the DIY fruit one, it's the combination of the orange juice aromas and the cloudy ammonia. There's some recipes. Don't need to write this down because it's all on the website. Just shows you that we're using similar things to Mediterranean fruit fly as well. I've actually seen European wasps come into some of these traps. So that's a good thing with regards to the dual purpose of doing the monitoring, but do be careful when you're emptying the fruit fly traps, particularly the DIY ones, in case those wasps are still alive. So, fruit fly traps. I know this slide is a bit confusing, but the important things to remember here is that it is important to use a mix of protein traps, traps with male attractants, and traps with a fruit scent. They can all tell you something about what population of fruit flies are around you. And fruit flies are notoriously good at missing traps as well, so hopefully if you don't get them in one, you get them in the other. Fruit fly baiting. It's a food with an insecticide and some water. The organic version, the insecticide is actually spinosad. Some people add sweeteners or thickeners to the fruit fly bait to make it stay as droplets on the leaf. But the idea is just to put droplets on the leaf. So put the mixed liquid in a pressure pack and apply it as droplets on the leaf in a jet stream as you're moving the wand. And the sample photo that I've taken is probably very excessive if you look in too much detail, but I was trying to capture those small droplets as they're coming out of that jet stream, out of that wand. And it is simply a few drops here and a few drops there. But the complexity in baiting is actually starting 8 to 6 weeks before harvest, so there's no fruit fly around when you harvest. And to keep the baiting program, the weekly baiting program up for nearly a month afterwards. Some labels say 2 weeks post-harvest, but what we're finding here in the Yarra Valley is that time frame from when a larvae falls out of that ripe fruit on the tree to when they're actually emerging after they've done their pupa session, their time in the pupa case, as they come out of that and they're hungry and seeking protein again, can be as late as 17 to 18 days afterwards. So it is important to go just that little bit longer than the 2-week period. This product washes off in water, so it needs to be repeated after it's rained or there's irrigation. You can't put the bait on the fruit. So this is where farmers have come up with different strategies, such as bait on the trunk applications or baiting blocks of fruit trees that don't have any fruit on them anymore. All different ways of getting around having no risk of the fruit fly bait getting on the fruit. So now we're starting to build this IPM approach. We're using protein to attract the immature fly. We're also using protein to attract pregnant female flies and those who are part of their normal feeding requirements. We're attracting them with pheromone lures, such as the male fruit fly lure, and we're also attracting them with that fruit scent, that they think that they're going to come to something that's bright like a piece of fruit, round like a piece of fruit, or smelling like a piece of fruit that's about to ripen. So using all of these tools, we're actually starting to increase our range in the fruit fly life cycle that we can have an impact and exploit their weaknesses. So this physical or mechanical or non-chemical approach of destroying the fruit either by freezing, boiling, or double bagging and putting in the rubbish bin, solarizing, mulching the fruit on the ground, whilst it's not 100% effective at controlling fruit fly, it does have a huge impact on controlling that risk that fruit fly and potentially infested fruit brings. The mechanical destruction of putting the mulcher or the lawnmower over the fruit can actually create that inhospitable conditions for the larvae to survive, and then bring in some chooks or bring in a hot, dry day, that larvae will die before it's able to successfully pupate. So using this hygiene is a very good technique for Queensland fruit fly management. In fact, it's the #1 preferred method. Queensland fruit fly also should not be put into a compost bin. So if you have suspicious fruit, you've some larvae, it's in there, or you think you've been in a fruit fly area, please do not put it in the compost bin. It's only going to accelerate that whole life cycle and possibly increase the chance the fruit fly will survive. So double bagging, freezing, boiling or microwave, and get it into the rubbish bin. Removing the waste is also a challenge as well. So particularly from a commercial level because the volumes are so high. But it can be fed to animals. The animals' guts do destroy the Queensland fruit fly. The fermentation that I spoke about right at the very start when we looked at that low oxygen, high acid, drowning environment, that is a non-chemical way that we are working with fruit growers in the Yarra Valley to use. That can then be disposed of once it's been through an approved length of time to kill larvae or eggs that could be in the fruit. A really good way of boiling fruit on a barbecue is pictured up in that top right corner because they use the wok burner there and get through large volumes. Putting it in the freezer or isolated chambers is the last method there that's pictured. So now we've actually created the IPM control of Queensland fruit fly. We've used proteins, we've used fruit fly lures that attract the pheromone lures that attract the male. We can apply this to mating disruption. We're using the fruit scents and we're using hygiene. So now we've got a really good grip on managing Queensland fruit fly. And this particular diagram doesn't include those cover spray options. So then only if this situation gets out of hand and Queensland fruit fly continue to be a problem would you then consider cover sprays for Queensland fruit fly. These proteins, the male fruit fly attractants and the fruit scents and dealing with the removing that fruit from the ground or not letting it get there, none of those processes are actually going to be damaging to the good bugs in the production system. So some organic additions and pieces of information here that are really helpful is we're looking at if you're trying to be organic, you still can use traps that have the chemical in them, so long as the chemical doesn't touch your system or your fruit. There are also some fully organic options that have no chemicals in them, so do your investigations and look at the different trap types there. Hygiene is obviously very organic. The bait can actually have an organic toxicant, that's spinosad. You can use other chemicals as well that aren't organic, but if we're looking for organic options, spinosad is the active that you're looking for. There are pyrethrum sprays, but they're not necessarily as effective as some of the other non-organic cover sprays. It's just important to consider where you're using that and how long you need that spray to last. The pyrethrum sprays can also do damage to those other insects or those non-target insects. Sorry, I've put the chemical picture over the word non-target there. So pyrethrum, whilst it is organic, it is not necessarily soft or targeted. It is very broad spectrum and should still have a degree of caution when using it. You can use grazing, so graze your chooks underneath an infested area, or just to keep the fruit quantity of ripe fallen fruit at bay. Be careful when you're shifting waste fruit to animals, though. There's still requirements that you have to keep that fruit secure and not able to reinfest new areas. A cultural technique is early harvest. A lot of people do apply that early harvest, but I personally think that this is a bit of a risky method, and I don't like the idea of losing any flavour in my fruit. So I prefer using the idea of netting and preventing the fruit fly in the first place. Some fruit can be sprayed with a kaolin spray, and that can almost mask the fruit from the Queensland fruit fly, and hopefully they don't successfully come and find it and lay their eggs in it. And Penny Woodward has written lots of information in her book about using herbs and other organic matter to be able to repel pests. So I haven't seen the science behind that, but I'm not going to let science get in the way of trying a product if it works. Definitely give that a go if that's up your alley. I won't touch on it tonight, but sterile insect technology is an option we're looking at in the future, and that's where Queensland fruit flies are grown in a factory. They're sterilised with irradiation, and then the males are released into the environment where there's Queensland fruit flies in the wild, and the breeding of the sterile male with the wild female, often the aim of the game there is to have the offspring or no chance of offspring because the male is infertile. It's something we might put away for another webinar one day when the time comes that we can afford to apply in the Yarra Valley. At the end of the day, we need to use all of these tools and all of the tools I mentioned before and look at the overall area-wide management. We need to remove those host weeds. We need to stop the fruit fly being able to live in unmanaged situations, and we need to be very careful of the fruit that we import into the region. Here's some samples of how to use fruit fly netting. It can be bags over trees. It can be arches created over your garden space with the fine netting of 2mm by 2mm holes. It's really important to make it easy to put on, easy entry. Make sure it can be repaired and make sure it's UV stabilized so that it can be reused. You put your netting on after the fruit trees have been pollinated, and it is a lot of planning and tree pruning for underneath so that you look after your netted area. Gardening with fruit fly is quite complex. It's quite innovative. We've seen lots of people use different netting designs to try and protect their fruit, and it is a very successful, chemical-free, reusable method to prevent fruit fly stinging fruit. So we're getting close to the end now. I am aware that it is 8 o'clock, but this is a bit of a summary. So traps are used mainly for surveillance. There are different types of fruit fly traps to target different parts of the fruit fly population. They're hung in a tree about 1.5 meters high out of the direct sunlight, and they need to be checked so that you can watch those trends in that fruit fly population that's around you. We start in the Yarra Valley at about September. Northern Victoria trap all year round. So if our climate changes, we might need to start our trapping date when we start fruit fly trapping. Fruit fly bait needs to be in play before that Queensland fruit fly is going to mature. So you almost need to start 1 or 2 weeks earlier than when the fruit flies around, and this correlates with 6 to 8 weeks before harvest. So it's a weekly application of a bait. It's quite affordable. It's definitely less invasive than a cover spray, but it is labor intense and important not to miss a week. Hygiene, we talked quite heavily about that much earlier, and quite significantly throughout the whole presentation today. So we are looking at treatment of that infested fruit with boiling or freezing preferably. You can use solarizing if you want to. Most important part of hygiene, though, is the removal of those unmanaged host plants. So we're very heavily relying on physical, mechanical, and cultural techniques with hygiene. Cover sprays are there, but we're not going to focus on using that as our first line of defense in an IPM program. Netting seems to be the most successful, least disruptive to IPM strategy to use. So making sure you get your net on at the right time before that fruit starts to size or colour, and then you can shift it around the garden to different crops as they come into their ripe period. Here's a photo of the orchard where I used to live. I grew up here, and we had a codling moth problem. And we thought, great, we'll put these isomates out and we'll disrupt the breeding of the codling moth. But where we failed is that we didn't engage with the orchards and the vineyards around us, and we still got some codling moth damage happen to our fruit. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get your neighbours on board with area-wide management of any pest, and in particular Queensland fruit fly, because it does just fly over the fence. So start early with the monitoring, have a plan of what you're going to do if you do find fruit fly, and try and encourage your neighbours and the people around you to also act, and we will be able to control Queensland fruit fly. We've done it in areas. There's 6 neighbours I had working together in that Yellingbo Seville area, and they worked together tirelessly to prevent and clean up any fruit fly, and they've not had fruit fly back in 5 years. So it is very achievable if we work together. You can go and look at some YouTube videos on area-wide management and the sterile insect technique. I think we've run out of time tonight, so we won't go into those. There's some more videos that we have. All of these are located on our website. They look at how to control fruit fly with an IPM strategy in commercial situations and also your home garden. Sorry, I'll try and get past that one. This is a photo of my mum. We were picking, on this particular day, we were picking some beautiful apples that were, it's my dad up in the tree there on the ladder picking these apples. We really enjoy growing our fruit in the Yarra Valley, and we love being able to do it without having to look at fruit fly nets. So I present this fruit fly information with a vested interest on behalf of the fruit growers of the Yarra Valley, that if we can prevent this pest from establishing in the region, we can continue to prosper, and home gardens will continue to prosper as well. So we need to not do nothing. We need to get in early, and that whole prevention is going to protect all of those insects, those beneficial pollinators, those beneficial predators that we have in our growing production systems. So you can probably help by working in your community to make people aware that Queensland fruit fly is an important pest to manage and prevent. And there's different ways you can do that. I'd love for you to all be able to get onto the Fruit Fly website, which is in the middle of the screen here, fruitflyfreeyv.com.au, and be able to watch this video again on the Yarra Ranges Land Care YouTube channel. And there's some links here for further investigation or contacting Agriculture Victoria. There's some great schools resources out there if your kids want to get involved in managing fruit fly with this IPM focus at front of mind. So correct identification, targeted strategies, and monitoring. We hope to be able to continue the Yarra Valley Preparedness Program, but unfortunately, due to funding constraints, it's going to have to be pared back, and individuals will be looking at different ways they can monitor. But I hope in the future that we find a way to share this information so that it promotes early action and minimises any control responses so that doesn't damage all of those good bugs that we have in our gardens and orchards. These are just some examples of the engagement that we've been able to do, and shows you the importance of getting everyone involved in the area-wide management of Queensland fruit fly. So, Corey, I do have lots more, but I think this is a really good place to stop. I've been able to get my message out, I hope, and I'm ready to field some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. Yeah, we do have time for some questions. So if you do have any questions, chuck them in the Q&A function. We have one from Karen actually already. She asks, do you post sightings to local Facebook pages to alert residents? And I might just add an addendum to that. Who else would you tell if you have Queensland fruit fly on your property?
First people I would tell if I had fruit fly on my property, other than my immediate family and the people that are working on my property, are my neighbours. They're the next ones that are going to be affected by those Queensland fruit fly. You might even find it's also the other way around. They might have fruit fly and hadn't told you yet because they're too scared to tell you. So once you both know that you've got fruit fly or you might get it, you can take those necessary and minimal actions. With the notifications, you may have already come across some of the notifications that I put out on Facebook or that I have sent to community gardens, or even if particularly there's Queensland fruit fly in your area or in your street, you may have received a letter from the Yarra Ranges Council. So currently these things take place. That's those social media notifications and the letter to your door. Unfortunately, this isn't going to take place after this season. The government funding to do this has dried up. So we're going to have to look for ways where we're more alert about our own surroundings, just as residents in the Yarra Valley. And I think we're going to have to rely on that, either that organic social media that say, hey, I've got fruit fly. Don't be ashamed to say it. It can happen to the best of growers. But the more people that know that you've got fruit fly, the better. Another thing you could do is go and talk to your local garden centre or nursery, because they're going to be able to tell loads more people than you can tell. And quite likely their customers are going to be also wanting to grow good fruit and veggies. So yeah, tell as many people as you can.
Jeff's got a great question for you, Bronwyn. He asks, who do we contact to try and get increased funding?
I think your politicians and parliamentarians are where it sits at the moment, writing to them to ask them to either continue or, yeah, definitely increase the funding. I'll stay around if there's more program to be delivered. What you could also do is work yourself, I think is probably more likely going to happen. Work yourself with your neighbours or with a community group that you're part of, and see if you can just work together with sharing that information about fruit fly in the meantime. I think that's, we can write letters to the state government, but they've made it very clear that they're not going to fund this anymore. It's a pest that we have to manage ourselves. So that's why I'd rather put my energy into strengthening our local response than waiting on a politician to take some action.
Mm. And another one from Karen. She says, I had children at a school which did little checking of its veggie patch and fruit trees over the Xmas holidays. Have all schools been contacted to alert their parent volunteers?
Yeah, we've actually run over the years a fruit fly education and awareness campaign right through schools. So we actually have, I mentioned those schools resources on one of the slides. I did go over it quite quickly. There's all of these schools resources available for students to learn about Queensland fruit fly life cycle. It fits in their science, biology. It also fits in their social sciences, looking at trade and biosecurity. So all of those resources are available to schools. All schools in the Yarra Valley have been offered the school's fruit fly program free of charge for a number of years now. And a lot of the schools that have taken up that offer of that free education have also had news items put in their newsletters, and they've gone out to the parents to say, hey, this is really important to our region. Your kids have learned about this today. Here's the things that you can do at home. Um, if there is a school that still doesn't look after their fruit trees over summer, I'd be really interested in going to offer them this fruit fly information again this summer before I'm no longer funded. So if you could PM me that particular school, um, we really do need to look at managing those school grounds like your own backyard. And if you're going to go away for the summer holidays, it'd be really good if you could encourage your neighbours, your friends or family to come in and harvest your peaches while you're gone, to prevent fruit fly being a risk in that in that region. And the same for schools. I think encouraging students and parents to come into those school grounds over those holiday periods would be a really workable solution.
I'll ask just a quick one. Where do I get some netting? Where do I get some of that special netting, Bronwyn?
You should be able to go to your garden centre and ask for that 2 mil by 2 mil insect mesh. If they don't have it, um, they should be able to get it in for you. And if you need it, it's very likely that your neighbours and other people in that town are going to need that netting as well. And it would be good for them to realise that there's going to be a few sales in this. We need to do it. It also can be reused, by the way, for your keeping the cabbage moths off your leafy winter greens if you don't cut it up too much. Um, the traps and netting, you can also go to some of the agronomy stores. Uh, Hortitech in Monbulk has a great supply of affordable netting cuts, and I found ordering a netting box online has been really good for me because I'm time poor and I've got lots of areas that I need to net. And these boxes are a 3 by 3 box structure already pre-sewn, and they have a zipper door in them, and you can just put them over some poly pipe, and then when it comes time
Mm.
to harvest you just zip in and zip back out again. So check out online for those knitting that's already pre-sewn into the boxes. It's handy as.
Awesome. All right. Well, we might wrap it up there. Thank you once again so much, Bronwyn. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone joining from home and everyone watching this presentation hereafter. I think this is a really valuable discussion for community, and particularly in the Yarra Valley, where I'm hearing we have lots of new residents kind of filing in after COVID, and so that's lots of new conversations to be having with your neighbours.
There's always room for a new conversation. Someone doesn't know about it. Everywhere I go, there's usually someone that doesn't know yet. My work here is not yet done. I'm just really hoping that we can not have to get to that level where other regions have got with that really high chemical use. I'm quite passionate
Mm.
about my good bugs in my garden and my lacewings and my ladybugs and um, even all of those little mites that attack the other mites. Like it really is an important ecosystem to protect. And I know in other areas they've lost all of that. So if I can just advocate again to protect your insect biodiversity and create the situation where you're not broad spectrum chemical application or doing any broad spectrum chemical applications, I think we've got a chance.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, anything we can do to avoid that, because we don't want all that collateral damage.